I'm Steve Wilkerson, and I'm with David Royse, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. And David, another year is coming to a close, and I would like to say on behalf of the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association and me, how much I have enjoyed working with your colleagues and with you, with the News Service of Florida. It's been a great year.
Well, thank you. We've enjoyed it too. I've enjoyed doing it, and hopefully we'll continue to.
Well, you know, every Monday I get to see your face and look ahead to what's going to happen, and I'm more in the know than a lot of people for about an hour.
Good.
So let's do it. Let's talk about what happened in 2012, the top 10 stories as selected by you and your colleagues at the News Service of Florida. Let's go first with number 10. There was a lot of talk about gambling this year, the expansion of casino gambling.
Yeah, and ultimately, so far, what happens in Vegas has stayed in Vegas. And Biloxi and St. Louis and southern Indiana and just about, I don't know, 3/4 of the country, it seems like, but not so much in Florida. The big gambling company Genting, it's a Malaysian company that was making a big push, among others, for expanded gambling in Florida, and they had a bill in the legislature last year to allow these big resort casinos, and that bill failed, and the new Senate leadership and the new House leadership have said they want to take a step back and maybe wait a couple years, study the issue. So I think for now, big expansions of casino-style gaming are off the table, and I don't know when we might see that again. I predict that we will eventually, but that was a big story this year. We thought it was going to be a bigger story, and they beat back the effort to expand gambling.
Number 9, there was a big fight over higher education, especially the creation of a new technological university, a Polytech university. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think in the long run, this could be a big story, maybe bigger than it seems right now. This year, we saw the official creation of the University of South Florida Polytechnic University, which will be in Lakeland. The fight over the creation of this university and whether the state needed another university, and a 12th state university, was a big dominant feature of the budget debate and the policy debate. Ultimately, the backers of a new USF Poly won out, and so we'll see that university. I think we'll know how big of a deal that is probably in 6 or 10 years.
Well, voting came to the surface again in Florida. The 8th most important story was voting problems in Florida again. There was some legislation passed about early voting and so forth, new laws, new rules, and then long lines. Talk about it.
Yeah. You know, remember we moved Florida's primary back earlier in the year, and we finally figured out the reason they did that. It was because they needed the time to figure out who the winner was. Florida can't seem to get elections right. And, you know, going back to 2000, when we, of course, had the big recount and the butterfly ballots, to this year, when we had particularly long lines, and mostly in a few counties. In most of the state, voting went fairly smoothly, but in a few places, Miami-Dade, also a couple of counties in southwest Florida, a few places in Broward County, voting was horrible. It was a terrible experience for people. Some people waited 6, 7 hours just to cast a ballot. What went wrong, we're not really sure. The state is starting to look at that. And there are all kinds of things that change. Voting was a year-long story. It's been more than a year, but it was a big part of, you know, the story of state government this year was this battle over how easy or how difficult it's going to be to vote. There were all kinds of changes. You know, we reduced the number of early voting during our days during the election year this year. Some people say that may have been part of what made it more difficult to vote. There were some changes to the way you register. And then there was a year-long battle over whether or not we were going to purge the voter rolls from people who may have been illegal immigrants. That was a battle that lasted almost a year. So this ongoing fight about how easy or how difficult it should be to register to vote and then to cast a ballot was another ongoing story this year. I think that will probably continue to be a story for years to come.
Number 7, a young African-American man was gunned down in South Florida, killed, and the defense for that act was Florida's Stand Your Ground law, and that's led to a major look at that law. It's lasted most of the year. Bring us up to date.
Yeah, this is the Trayvon Martin case, and actually in Central Florida near Orlando, early in the year. Trayvon Martin was shot. He was unarmed. He was walking through the neighborhood, and he was shot by a man who was a neighborhood watch volunteer who claimed self-defense. Maybe the only good thing to come out of that, because obviously 2 lives, 2 families, you know, have basically seen these 2 lives ruined, one snuffed out, and of course the shooter, George Zimmerman, his life has changed forever as well. Maybe the only good thing was that it raised awareness of how the self-defense law works in Florida, and it forced a new look at that law and a particular part of the self-defense law known as Stand Your Ground. As you said, as in the wake of that shooting, Governor Rick Scott appointed a special commission to take a new look at that law. It's about 5 years old, to see whether we need changes. Now, as it turns out, that commission met for most of the year, and they have finalized their recommendations, or they're in the process of finalizing their recommendations, and they didn't really recommend a lot of changes. This is an issue that is going to be fought out in the legislative session to come in 2013, so there may still be some changes, but it's good that, you know, laws that actually have an impact on people's lives, you know, every once in a while we can sort of look back at those laws with a real world focus and see what the impact of the way those changes in the law have affected people.
The new federal health care law, known as Obamacare, is still incredibly controversial. Florida sued to stop that law under the Commerce Clause. The U.S. Supreme Court said it's okay. And they didn't even deal with the Commerce Clause, as it turned out. It called it a tax. But that's a big deal to Florida, and so Florida's trying to deal with it. That's big story number 6. Talk about that. That's had a huge impact.
We had to put this in the top 10 because this was a dominant national news story, and there of course was a Florida angle, but this was a dominant story that sort of permeated American life in 2012. As you said, the Supreme Court upheld the law in the summer, and then, in a sense, the election in November upheld the law as well, because Mitt Romney lost the election and he was promising to try to overturn that law. The requirement that all Americans purchase health insurance is going to be a major focus of life for government bureaucrats in Florida and elsewhere going forward. And the necessity that Medicaid expand to pay for health care for a large number of Floridians is going to continue to be a central debate in Florida. It's always been a huge part of the budget debate in Florida. The way we pay for health care for people in this country and in this state in particular, where we have a lot of elderly people. We also have a lot of people in particular socioeconomic groups down near the bottom of the socioeconomic scale who tend to be less healthy and need health care from the government. How we pay for that has always been a big debate, and it's going to continue to be. And with the requirement that Obamacare go forward, that debate is only going to get intensified in Florida over the next couple of years.
Story number 5. Florida was supposed to be a huge swing state, expected possibly to go to Mr. Romney in the presidential election. In the end, it went to President Obama, and a lot of people say it's because of the Hispanic vote. Talk about that. You talked about it a lot during the year.
It's one of the most stunning changes over the last couple of years in electoral politics, I think. The degree to which large numbers of Hispanics have registered, and they have been primarily registering independent and Democratic. In Florida, about 500,000 Hispanics registered for this election cycle, this last election cycle, as independents. About 600,000 registered as Democrats, and only 400 and something thousand registered as Republicans. Republicans are shrinking in numbers because they are losing the battle to register Hispanics in their party. The number of white voters as a proportion of the electorate as a whole is shrinking. The number of Hispanic voters as a proportion of the larger electorate is growing. If Republicans don't figure out how to deal with the changing demography of this country, and Florida in particular, they're going to become a much smaller party compared to the Democratic Party. It was a major factor in the election of President Obama, who got about 70% of the Hispanic vote nationwide. Democrats are focused on courting Hispanics. They also think they line up in terms of issues because they're less interested in cracking down on illegal immigration. Most Hispanic people at least know an illegal immigrant, unlike many white people. And the Republican Party needs to figure out what to do about this, or they're going to continue to shrink.
All right. There's a character in Florida politics. A lot of people refer to this character as the chameleon. Who would that be? And this is story number 4 about the re-emergence of the chameleon.
Charlie Crist is back in the news, and we called this Cristo Changeo in our office, this story, all year long. Charlie Crist, of course, former Republican governor of Florida, disappeared. He ran for the United States Senate instead of running for a second term as governor. He ran for the United States Senate, and in 2010 was, we thought, off the scene. And then this summer, his face started popping up on billboards for a law firm that he works for, the Morgan & Morgan firm in Central Florida.
They look suspiciously like political billboards to me.
They sure do. And Charlie Crist's sort of motto when he was governor was that he was working for the people, and coincidentally, the Morgan & Morgan law firm's motto is for the people. That worked out very nicely, and Charlie Crist's name has been floated about as a possible candidate for governor as a Democrat. He recently made that switch official. He, of course, made a big sort of, I guess the coming out moment for Charlie Crist as a possible Democrat was at the Democratic National Convention, where he got to go up on stage and speak. He endorsed President Obama for re-election, and now he's officially registered as a Democrat, and there's a lot of talk that he may run for governor. A lot of Democrats don't really know what to think of this. They don't know whether that's a good idea or whether they want Charlie Crist to be their candidate for governor. But Charlie Crist has a few things that the Democrats don't seem to have been able to find in a candidate for governor lately. Name recognition, incredible ability to fundraise, likability. In short, Charlie Crist is electable, and the Democrats have not been able to find an electable gubernatorial candidate. So who knows? I think, we'll know next year probably whether Charlie Crist is going to run for governor. But that was a huge story this year, the reemergence of Charlie Crist as a Democrat.
Top story number 3. And, it was touch and go, but top story number 3, the Democratic victory in Florida on Election Day.
Yeah, any of the top 3 stories probably could be switched around. The top 3, it's almost like a tie, a 3-way tie for number 1, but we chose as number 3, the Democratic victory on Election Day. And the reason it wasn't higher was because Florida actually didn't, in the presidential race, Florida didn't end up really mattering. President Obama eventually did win Florida, but he won the presidency before we even knew who the winner of Florida was. He had enough electoral votes. But Democrats gained seats in the legislature for the first time in recent years. They gained more seats than they had in several years, and they picked up some big seats. They also ousted several Republican members of Congress, well, a couple of Republican members of Congress, including a high-profile ouster, which I'll talk about with another top story.
Right.
But it was a good year for Democrats at the polls.
Okay, let's go to number 2, and I think this is where you want to talk about a couple of things. Redistricting matters.
Yeah, this year, the redistricting, the redrawing of all of the political boundaries in Florida that happens every decade, this past year they did that under new rules. There was a constitutional change that that said they had to draw those lines essentially without respect to political party and without trying to protect candidates. And I think the Republicans generally made a pretty good faith effort to do that, particularly in the House. And they ended up with districts that I think ended up favoring a slight Democratic pickup. The Democrats in the legislature ousted 3 or 4 sitting Republican incumbents. Some incumbents were drawn together. A guy like Scott Plakin, who was a prominent Republican in the legislature, who ended up in a district where he couldn't win. He ended up losing. A guy who was a Republican in line to be a future House Speaker, Crist, who ended up with a district that evidently didn't favor him either because he lost to a barely known Democratic candidate. So Democrats picked up seats in the House. It was a good year for Democrats in part because of the way the districts were drawn. On the congressional scene, we saw several big changes. Probably the biggest was the ouster of Tea Party favorite one-term Congressman Allen West. He is no longer in Congress, largely because the districts were drawn in a way that forced him to move to a new district where a lot of voters didn't know him. Cliff Stearns, who was a longtime member of Congress from Florida, he was ousted in the primary because he was in a district that was not as familiar with him. One of the big stories on primary election night was Ted Yoho, who is now headed to Congress, who defeated Cliff Stearns in the election, in the primary, in the Republican primary. Redistricting at work again. One-term Congresswoman Sandy Adams had to run against another incumbent, John Micah, an entrenched, longtime incumbent Republican. She is no longer in Congress. Again, redistricting. So the way the map was drawn ended up, I think, largely favoring Democrats, and it's changed the political landscape for the next decade to come.
And the top story in 2012, da-da-da-da, and we hope it continues as a headline for 2013, finally, the economy is improving.
Yeah. Everything looks good in terms of the trajectory. We are out of the recession, and it looks pretty good. Now, there's a couple of things looming out there. The fiscal cliff talks in Washington, if the nation goes off the fiscal cliff, as they say, all bets are off. But in general, this has been a year of good news on the economy. The opposite of last year, when at the end of the year we were talking about one of the top stories being another year of terrible news in the economy. This overall has been a good economic year in Florida. Governor Scott, whether he deserves it or not, will get some of the credit for that. He has talked about creating jobs, and that's been his focus, and jobs have been created. Florida has created over 150,000 private sector jobs since the end of 2010. Florida's jobless rate back in October was 8.5%. At the beginning of 2011, we were looking at up over 11%. So things are coming back. Tax collections, for the Tallahassee, the inside Tallahassee crowd, the reflection of people going back to work is that tax collections are rebounding. It'll be a little bit easier to write a budget this year. So houses are selling again and at prices that are starting to be more sensical. Everything over the year, it's been a steady climb for the economy in Florida. It's been generally good news month to month to month. It's been a slog, but the economy is going this way for the first time in years.
At the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And again, my friend, happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too.
And to all of you who are watching, happy holidays to you, and come back to see us in 2013.